Welcome to Share Talk, the only podcast where investors come first.
Kavango Resources is an exploration company targeting the discovery of world-class mineral deposits in Botswana. It's listed on the standard list of the London Stock Exchange and has a market cap of £2.7 million. Well, is it any closer to achieving that target? A recently published independent technical review has highlighted the potential. Mike Moles is director and co-founder of Kavango Resources. He joins us now. So Mike, Kavango's licenses cover the geological trend called the Kalahari Suture zone, or the KSZ, which are prospective for copper, nickel and platinum. Now, before we talk about the review's findings, tell me about the author of the independent review. Why should we care?
Well, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with you about this. Dr. David Howe is an associate professor at Leicester University, and he's a specialist in magmatic sulfide deposits. And he is one of the people one needs to talk to if you're interested in this particular type of mineral deposit. We would get out of it the opportunity to use some of the facilities of the Leicester University. We asked him if he would review all the data that we had accumulated on the Kalahari Suture zone over the last 2 or 3 years, and to give us an opinion as to what he thought of it and whether he thought that we were on the right track with respect to the discovery of major copper, nickel and PGE deposits. And he was happy to do that and thought that it was an important start, and we sent him a lot of information. We had some discussions with him, and he wrote this report. It is quite a technical report.
Okay, so let us drill down into that report. It describes the data reviewed from Kavango's field exploration in the Kalahari Suture zone, which we'll call KSZ. What progress has the company made there over recent years?
The geological model is really modelled on a huge copper-nickel deposit in Russia, in Siberia, in fact, called the Norilsk deposit. It's the largest copper-nickel-platinum group deposit in the world by far. It provides 75-80% of all of Russia's copper and nickel requirements, and it's a sort of classic model on which to base exploration. So I think back in 2012, a colleague of mine, Hilary Gumbo, who I had worked with a few years before in Zimbabwe, and I got together and we decided to do some work in Botswana. We liked Botswana very much because Botswana is, one of the good boys of Africa. I mean, they have a very good reputation with respect to corruption and ease of doing business. And I've worked in many different countries in Africa, and I can assure you that Botswana is by far and away the easiest country in which to do work. So we liked Botswana. We also liked the fact that about 2/3 of the country are covered in sand, Kalahari sands, and so you can't see the rocks. And although this might seem a rather strange thing to say for a geologist, a lot of the great deposits in the world have already been found. And if you want to find a new, really big deposit, you need to start looking in places where it's difficult to find them. So sand cover, Kalahari sand cover, looked to us like an interesting way to go. It does make the exploration more difficult, but the chances of finding a really big deposit was much greater. And so we used the Norilsk model to see if we could find something that looked similar in Botswana. And by examining the regional magnetic maps of Botswana, we found this extraordinary magnetic body, which has a strike length of about 450 kilometers and about 50 kilometers wide. And it's a massive magnetic anomaly that people really didn't understand what it was. And the Canadians had actually drilled it way back in the late 70s. But I think the drilling was somewhat inconclusive. And people, I think, at that time felt that it was just too difficult. It was buried beneath the sand. You couldn't see any of the rocks. And I think there were easier targets that companies were able to look at. And I don't think that in those days the technology was up to doing that type of exploration. So Hilary Gumbo and I formed a small company called Kavango in Botswana, and we looked at the core that had been drilled in the 70s, which remarkably for Africa had been very well preserved and kept in the government core shed. And the guys there got all the core out for us, and we examined, I think, about 8 or 9 holes which had been drilled into the Suture zone, and looked at the mafic rocks that were giving the magnetic signature to the Suture zone. And we realized fairly quickly that there were 2 quite separate periods of intrusives. These intrusives are injections of magma into the underground rocks. And I don't think that had been fully understood before. And that the relationship between the younger intrusives and the sediments into which they were intruded had great similarities to the Norilsk deposits. So we were encouraged by this, and we got quite excited. We got some academic geologists to carry out some test work on the samples that we were able to take from these holes. So we didn't actually have to drill any holes. They'd already been drilled, but they just needed to have sort of modern techniques applied to them. And I think the potential of the Kalahari Suture zone started to become apparent to us. And we started to get quite excited about it.
Okay, but that's a very comprehensive background review. Thank you for that. I just want to come back to the most recent technical review, though. What is the significance of the presence of the 10 key geological features identified with the KSZ project by the review that's just been undertaken?
Yeah, okay. If one takes the model, the Norilsk model, there are about another dozen similar deposits around the world which have distinct similarities to the Norilsk deposits. And they tend to have certain characteristics which I wouldn't say are essential for the development of significant mineralization, but they are themselves important characteristics which suggest a greater potential for the development of big deposits of copper and nickel. And so what Professor Holwell has done is he has constructed a table of those important characteristics, which if you can tick those off, the more that you can tick off, the more likely you are to be looking at a situation where significant mineralization exists. What we've got in this report are 10 characteristics which have all been sort of ticked off. I mean, this is work that we've already done, and he has gone through the data that we've accumulated and said, yes, this is an important characteristic of a Norilsk type deposit. Let's tick that box. And he's gone down the list and ticked 10 boxes. There are more boxes, and the more boxes you can tick, the better it is. I think altogether there are about 16 different boxes that can be ticked. Now, those which haven't been ticked will, I'm sure, be ticked in due course. And Professor Holwell has identified some of those other attributes that need to be confirmed. And most of those can be confirmed by laboratory testing. In other words, we take samples, and those samples are subjected to things like electron microprobe analysis, whole rock geochemistry analysis, very sort of technical things that all will add to that continuing and expanding list of important attributes for the development of a significant deposit. So it's very encouraging to us that 10 of these boxes have been ticked, and that we asked him what are the possibilities, what are the chances that the Kalahari Suture Zone represents the type of environment for the development of a major copper nickel PGM deposit. And we've got various quotes from him. So things like, for example, he quotes, after examining Kavango's data on the KSZ, the review concludes that the KSZ, in inverted commas, a prime setting for a magmatic copper nickel PGM deposit. So, that's very encouraging, so it means that we're in the right neck of the woods. We're in elephant country, if you like. All we can say is that so far, the boxes that have been ticked would suggest that there is nothing that would count against the development of a world-class copper-nickel PGM deposit on the KSZ. But I think that all the indications are so far that this is a prime setting for such a deposit. So it gives us the incentive to continue the exploration. And
so what is next?
It fires up our enthusiasm.
That's excellent. So you're all enthusiastic. And in terms of next steps, what is next following Dr. Howell's report?
Well, as I said earlier, there are some things which can be done in the laboratory, and that will be done relatively soon. But there are other things that we need to do out in the field. And probably the most important of those is to carry out ground-based EM surveys using special techniques which will allow us to get through conductive overburden and to identify massive sulfide ore bodies, which hopefully are not too deeply buried. Obviously, the depth of burial is quite a critical factor. Really, you would have to have an enormous deposit if your discovery was at 400 meters vertical depth or deeper. So what we are hoping to do is to find deposits which are, within 200 to 300 meters vertical depth.
So are you on track to make a mineral discovery in the near future?
I think we're very much on track. I think that we are moving in that direction. Obviously, all exploration, there are no guarantees in exploration, and sometimes you have to have a bit of luck on your side. But I remember that one of my bosses from my early career as a geologist saying that sometimes when you start an exploration program, things just go well all the way down the track. And in other cases, there's always a problem. And so far, I have to say that everything keeps unfolding in a favourable way. So it gives you a good feeling. It makes you feel that, the crock of gold is there waiting for us to discover.
And Mike, I think that is a perfect way to end this interview. Mike Moles, co-founder and director of Kavango Resources. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening. Remember to visit our website for more news and other podcasts at www.share-talk.com.